Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest. Before we introduce our guest, we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact is giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to public education in the form of a free gift. So if your district needs unrestricted funds, reach out to Ideal Impact. All right, we have a very special guest today. We have Dr. Hale from New Waverly ISD. Dr. Hale, thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this podcast is all about sharing the good word around public education. That's what this is about. And so we've had over 100 superintendents on the podcast. And
Oh,
so
wow.
we're always networking and meeting new people and just hearing different perspectives. And one thing we always like to share is every district's unique, every district's different, every leader in a district's different as well. And so would love to hear about your background and some details about your district, maybe the size and location, and then more about your background, how you got to where you are today.
Sure. Well, New Waverly we are a 3A district. We have about just under 1,100 students. And we are, well, I wouldn't say halfway between, but we're just north of the greater Houston area, right on I-45, between Conroe and Huntsville. So we're actually in a really big growing area where we're at 1,100 students, but a chance to pick up about 3,000 homes in the next couple of years, supposedly. So it's a real growing time for us. As a 3A district, we've just been a district that's kind of focused on trying to do everything you're supposed to do, but still kind of have that small town feel. And that's really been important to our community, is to feel like you're kind of home and your family wherever you're at. So that's been a really big portion for us. And we've tried to extend that into things like, well, if we have kids who are interested in a program and we can get someone who wants to do it, we'll do it, whether we've had it before or not, that kind of thing. So that's kind of been kind of our DNA, I guess you would say. And just all the expectations that you might have with being a district where you might be teaching at the high school, but you might have an elementary kid come up to you and say, "Hey, you have my brother in class," and you're like, "I don't even know who that is." But anyway, it's just one of those things, community wise, that's really been important to us. As far as myself, I've actually been superintendent here for, oh gosh, this is going into my 14th year, and I've been here in the district for over 20, but superintendent for 14, and it's my 36th year overall. Um, I was one of those guys that got started with coaching and teaching. I was coaching football and basketball, girls basketball, and teaching English, and that's where I thought my career was. And then that kind of bled into getting an administrative degree, which for me was actually because I thought I was going to coach college. So I was trying to get an advanced degree for that. Only I didn't do very well on having mentors. So no one pointed out that if I was going to coach college, it should be kinesiology. And since I was in education, I just thought, well, I think you're supposed to do administration. So I ended up with an administration degree going, what am I doing here exactly? And then, but that led into some assistant principal roles. Um, I got started teaching and coaching down in Rosenberg at Lamar Consolidated, and which is a really big district now. But at the time I was in, it was a big 5A district, but now they're just huge. And then I spent some time in Huntsville ISD, and then my first principalship was in a little town called Goodrich. We had 100 and well, we had about 300 kids total in the entire district, and I was elementary over half. So, and then from there, it's been New Waverly ever since. And born in Texas, out in West Texas, but we were part of that initial 80s oil boom. So we moved to Wyoming, and I actually graduated with my undergraduate from University of Wyoming, master's and doctorate at Sam Houston State. And now we're here in New Waverly. I've got 4 boys, all still in the district. Everything from a high school senior to a third grader. So it's a lot of fun at my house. As I say, sometimes I randomly open the door and yell no just to be safe. But but other than that, yeah, great wife, great kids, just really blessed.
Sounds like it. Yeah, and you're so true. It's so true with the the area that you're in right now, how it's growing. I'm in Kingwood, so not too far from there,
Okay.
and that
Yeah,
45 corridor is just growing so fast. I
it
imagine
really
that.
is.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, we do have a little bit of a delay. So if you notice some overlap there, that's what's going on. We got little tech issues. Not sure why, right? Not sure if it's a Zoom. Maybe everybody's on Zoom today. I don't know. Um, but but yeah, the area that you're at, we've talked to a lot of superintendents where, let's say their district was one size, and then a few years later it's quadrupled, or sometimes more than that. Um, have you seen kind of the community and the area in general transforming, and I mean Tomball may have experienced some of that. I know they grew pretty fast out there. Just kind of curious what you're seeing.
Yeah, I think on probably a much smaller scale than a lot of the districts might be thinking that we see it, and it's always that great wonder slash dilemma of being a little bit smaller, where you might say, hey, 40 new students is not a lot of growth, but sometimes in a smaller district, 40 feels like 400 for someone else. I definitely think we're seeing the early growing pains. We've only really had one subdivision, so to speak, completed, and that's really only half completed. And it brought 100 and I think it was 130 homes in a matter of 18 months. And so, in its own way, that was very impactful, both for immediately seeing some people that people didn't know, and then immediately a few kids coming in, and then the idea of, wow, there's all these other subdivisions slated. And so, this is kind of a foretaste of what's going to happen. And so I think community wise, there's still that real process. As much as the school has, the community is still processing. Things like, hey, I went to the gas station and I saw four people I didn't know, that kind of thing. And we joke, even to the point was there was a little bit of a social media storm for a while when Sonic came to town because there wasn't a Sonic. And there were definitely some people who had some ambivalent feelings towards Route 44s, apparently. So we kind of joked, and I think it was that that whole idea of, wow, this really is starting to change, and what does that mean for for my family or for me or for what I've always said or done, or hey, we have one red light in town and it used to be annoying to stop at, and now it's, I may have to stop several times because of the traffic. And so I think those are kind of those early precursor things that the community is seeing, and some may get excited about, but others are like, man, I just don't want it to change, kind of a thing.
Very interesting. Yeah. And it's always so interesting when you see communities transform, and kind of the change involved there. Luckily, it doesn't sound like your community's being impacted by any major changes, right? That cause a lot of I don't know what the right word is, but just a lot of change basically. Curious though, so I know you've worked at some different districts around Texas. What's on your radar screen right now? What is there something that you're very passionate about related to public ed that you're specifically focused on more than other things, or?
Sure. Well, probably two. One's a sort of a practical in the moment, and then of course the other one is the larger scale. I say practical in the moment. We're just completing a bond, so in fact, we're hoping to move into a new intermediate campus in the next 2 weeks, and passionate about that because it's really exciting and it's the conclusion of about 3.5 years of work, and also because it's exciting, but there's so much going on. Well, this doesn't work today, and we got to get the kids over here, and what is this going to do? And so, on an immediate impact, it kind of ties back to that growth. Our community sees it's coming, and so trying to prepare and get ahead of it enough to be able to take care of the kids and also provide really good facilities for just in fostering an environment for education. And so we're really excited about that because it's a lot for our community. And they were really supportive. And so being able to see that happen is an exciting time for kids, for staff, and even for the community. And that's kind of our big push right now, that's happening. I think for me, educationally, I think it's real easy to always talk about, in Texas, especially where we are educationally in terms of the public perception. And I think for me, I've always tried to be a person who said, listen, I think we all have to make decisions that are best for ourselves. And if I told you public education is the only answer, I just don't think that's the right or true cause. I think there's some people that a private or a homeschool education is the right answer for. It works for them or it works for their family. Just like I think public education is great because it works for others. And so I think my most passionate thing is um, why not find what works best for kids and let that happen for kids. And so that sounds like the argument that a lot of people make for vouchers. And my passion is not I'm against it or for it. It's just more of I think we have to be very wise in being equal across the board in how we educate our kids. And I think it would be a little bit of a folly if you gave a public education school $50 million and said, do whatever you want. We don't want to check anything. Go have fun. But I think if we do the same thing for a private school or a homeschool or a public school, I think we've got some real dangers there. So while I don't have a problem with us financing as different models, I'm really concerned of what do we have in place to make sure whoever it is able to help kids. Because if not, then not only do we have the problem of what happens if that system fails, which, that's a fair question for people to ask of public ed, excuse me, as well. But if we have more systems and we're not checking all of them, what happens to kids? And that's always my big thing. I for my own research and doctorals, I just did a meta analysis, basically a study of studies. And one of the things that came out when trying to comparing homeschooling, because I have a lot of friends who homeschool, but one of the interesting things that came out is there are a lot of states that are very, and Texas is one of them. Hey, if you want to homeschool, you homeschool. I'm for that. But one of the problems is there's an awful lot of children who get out of public ed, which is great, and they don't seem to be showing up in private or in homeschool. And in fairness, not everybody who homeschools wants people to know what they're doing, and I respect that. But I think it was Michigan basically couldn't account for where 40 to 50,000 students were. And I don't want to be a big brother. I just want to know, are we taking care of people? Is there a system? Is there a way we make sure that kids are getting needs met? That's probably my biggest thing about education. How do we meet needs of kids?
That's a I haven't heard that perspective before. That's a very unique perspective, and I've heard a part of it, but the whole picture that you just shared there is very unique. I think your doctorate was coming out a little bit in that in that answer
Yeah.
because the reason why I say that it was a very unbiased view of the whole picture and the whole situation, and it wasn't like, no, we can't do that. No, 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 we need to do this. This is the only way. And because I agree with you 100%. There's situations where certain scenarios make sense depending on the situation, but you have to have some way of oversight or some form of metric to keep track of things, and so that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and honestly, that's probably where I'm the most passionate about the whole voucher situation is, now I will put on my public school hat and just say I'm all for it, but I'm a fairly conservative person, and again, as a conservative value, you don't normally hand people a check and go, all right, go do whatever you want. There's even if it's just checking, hey, did you spend the money in the right area? That kind of thing. And so I'm a little concerned about that, personally. But I think kind of what you said, where I get passionate about it is, and we all do this, but when we talk about, oh, I hear let the money follow the child. I mean, that sounds great. And I am personally in favor of that. But I have 4 kids. And while I'm blessed, and I'm not going to tell you that, oh, times are hard for us. If we did a system where I received $4,000 a student in a voucher, I can tell you I don't pay $16,000 in property tax. So my first question is, let the money follow the student, but where's that money coming from? Because it's not all coming back from me. And I just think that when we make these systems, we really need to say, okay, where let's really talk about how we're going to do this, because the idea that we can fund four systems equally is great. But if we're going to do that, we got to have equity. Where's the accountability? How are we spending it? Where is it being spent? What's going on? What happens if I try a system that doesn't work for me? And then we need to go to a different system, but maybe I've already used up some of those funds. Are we going to give more funds, or are we going to go, oh, I'm sorry, one fund per year. That's all I can do for you. That, and I don't mean about people who abuse it. Like I said, I know a lot of people who homeschool. What would happen if I tried to homeschool and I spend all that, whatever money I'm given, and I buy a great curriculum and I'm getting stuff I need, but life happens. Maybe I have an elder parent and there's a medical emergency, and I have to change what our plan was. But we've already spent a great deal of money with the full intent of doing this, but now we need to think a new value. And so I just think that there's a lot of things we've really got to think through if we want kids to be successful.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. And I guess if you think about the flow of capital in any institution, there's always, whether it's a bank or a private investor, or I mean, there's always that
Yeah.
checks and balances and accountability with whoever's receiving those funds. That makes perfect sense. Um, well, I know we're running a little short on time now. I would love to hear about your kind of the vision for your district, maybe over the next 12 months, or what's coming up on the horizon to excite some people about.
Sure. Well, I think with what we've always loved here is that we've got a really great school board, and we're trying to, I'd say our biggest thing, our vision is how do we grapple, so to speak, with the idea of growth? Because we've kind of talked about it from just a statistical standpoint, but all those things, like how do you retain your values? When you say, hey man, that's not what we do here, we feel like we're pretty strong with that. But if I'm just moving in from a brand new place, or I'm moving in from let's say a very large urban area, now there's this, what do you mean some of these people have, they're raising animals, and not that they don't have FFA programs too, but there is a little different feel. And so we're both excited and challenged by how do we manage what is most likely going to be a growth that's probably going to result in us doubling or tripling in size, not in the next year, but certainly in the next 5 to 7 years. And so everything from, we're a 3A school, but we offer wrestling for boys and girls, and we offer soccer for boys and girls. And I haven't come across many 3A schools that do that. But we did that because we had kids who wanted to, and so how do we manage kids who have a passion for something that we don't have, and we want to bring that in, but we are still limited by things. So that's an exciting but a challenging time, and so that we're really excited about those prospects, and how do we continually push our students to achieve better for what comes next. We just talked last night in a board meeting and training about, success is, we want our kids when they leave here to go wherever they want to go, but either be ready for the challenge of what comes next, or let that challenge get them to where, hey, you want to go to technical school, you want to go to trade school, you want to go to the military, you want to get right in the workforce, an entrepreneur, or a family business, or you want to go to college, whatever those may be, or some new vote, path we don't know is. And how do we get kids ready? And we're all grappling with that, but then we throw in, we're trying to do it while growing, and it's sometimes a whole lot of, I don't really know what to do next, and how do we manage today? And so that's kind of really our exciting moment of, boy, how do you get the facilities ready? How do you get the program ready? How do you get the kid ready? And I know with my own kids, there's things I look at and go, dang, I don't know if you're quite ready for some stuff yet. Is that my fault, your fault, or all of our faults, or is it just part of growing up? And so I think that's an exciting time and a deeply challenging one at the same time.
Yes, yes, sounds like it. And I really like there's a couple of things that I've noticed a trend in just in the conversations with different superintendents, and that's customizing, almost like customizing solutions for the students depending on, their goals, their, dreams, that sort of thing. It does make me wonder though. I'm curious. So are there ever scenarios, and maybe it's a blend, maybe it's somehow woven in there, but Uh, I love the idea of the customization. What if, and I think about it with my kids, I have three daughters. Are there ever
Sure.
scenarios where you say, look, you need to go, you need to go this way? Like, is there ever like guidance on pointing them a direction versus them? And I'm not talking for your district specifically. I'm talking
Yeah.
in general public ed. I mean, have there been conversations around
Sure.
that?
And I think maybe I relate to it, as you said, kind of in that father aspect of when you're trying to be a good parent that says, listen, man, I want you to have your own dream, but and I want to believe in you and show you that, boy, with if you desire this and you work for it, you can be successful. But I think it's very true. And I even looking back in my own life and reflecting, how do you know what you want? And sometimes you don't know what you want. And um, so how do you pick those paths? And so I think that's a real struggle. We can look at tools and look at things like, hey, here's an interest inventory, or here's this kind of thought or that kind of thought. But I think so very often, and I can only really reflect on myself and in my own family for sure. But sometimes the choices that we make are really driven by data points that we really shouldn't be using. And what I mean by that is, it's like, if I grew up in Wyoming, there's one university now, which was our deal. So if you were going to stay in state, it was kind of easy for your going. Now if you want to go out of state for whatever reason, great. But like where we live, there's 5 universities within a 5-hour drive that are all major D1, and many. In fact, I think it's probably more than that. I guess probably 10. So if I said, hey, I want to stay close to home, and that was my driving factor, I still got to figure out between 10 schools, what am I doing? Where am I going? So I don't know that I know the answer to that, because it's really one that, I kind of struggle with too. Do I think you almost have to take it as a scatter approach? I kind of do. And what I mean by that is, maybe an interest inventory works for somebody. Maybe for somebody else, it's really trying to say, maybe you need to try a job here or a job there. And, if nothing else, find out what you don't like. Um, and then sometimes it's like, well, those thoughtful discussions, if you can engage in them or find the right person to engage, what do you really like? Right now, maybe this doesn't just, because what do you do if it's like, well, I joke because that's kind of who I am, but it's like, well, I haven't been bit by a radioactive spider. The USS Enterprise isn't around, and no one wanted to hire me for being an actor, and I love those kind of things. But I kind of joke, but sometimes the things we really desire are great. But how do we blend passion with a little wisdom without losing either one? It's like, oh well, you'll never be successful. Well, that success is differently measured. On the other hand, give myself an opportunity to enjoy and be successful. And that to me is a challenge that the only thing I can again think of is, let's take the hodgepodge effect. Let me talk about it. You talk about it. Hey, have you read this? Have you looked at this? Have you done this? I mean, just until something clicks, because I really don't know. I don't know sometimes how to help somebody. I want to go to college. What do you want to do? I don't know. I don't
Yep.
either. And for some people, that's a hard experiment. If the experiment's costing you 30,000 and you walk into it going, I really don't know what I want to do here, that's a little bit of a challenge. And I don't know, is it, well, if you don't know, should you take a little time off? Well, there's some pros and cons to that as well.
Yeah, yeah. There definitely seems there's some complexity to this, and definitely, I definitely like the direction it's going in public ed, where there are solutions available for different scenarios. It just reflecting on it through multiple conversations just kind of brought the question to surface here. I think about it like a personal trainer, right? So if somebody shows up to the gym,
Yeah.
a personal trainer may be like, hey, what do you feel like working out today? Or they may be like, hey, you need to work out your abs today, or you need to work. And so, but then you,
Yeah.
but you also see it with different communities. Like I grew up in Channelview, which is a small blue collar area. My wife grew up in Kingwood, which is, so when I was growing up, people in the community, if they were guiding you, hey, you should go work at the chemical plant, right? And my wife's
Yes.
my wife's family, they may have been, hey, you need to go work at an investment banking firm. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah. I, and I think, well, you're really right because obviously, too, you guys probably feel this. We're in an area of Texas. We're very close to Huntsville, like 10 minutes. Huntsville's famous for several things. There's a great university there, it's a good community, but it's TDC central. I mean, there's prisons all around the area. So there's a career path in the Department of Corrections and criminal justice that has that strong, kind of reverberation, so to speak, like you're talking about. One thing I do like is I think that even though I love college and I'm a college minded person, obviously, I really think that the increased value and understanding that careers that don't go through college, that go through trade school or technical school or career and educations, becoming more and more valuable, even at a state level, where they begin to understand that not every person needs to go to college to meet success. And I really think, like you just said about a trainer, it reminds me of one of our biggest challenges is getting the right definition. What's our definition of success? Because if you say it's only going to college, then you're limiting what you're going to offer people. And you may be limiting some people, and this isn't about intelligence, it's about what's right for you, what's a good fit for you. But if success is, man, I found something I like, I can make a good living, I can raise a family or live with friends and family, and I mean, to me, that's where success is. So making sure that we all understand, success is not just doing this, or you got to make 150,000 a year. I mean, there's a lot of people who make that kind of money and they're not real happy. And I think that that's all has to blend. What's our definition of success? And maybe that even goes back to your other question. Maybe if we all do a better job of figuring out what success is, maybe kids can do a better job of trying to figure out their path.
That's true. That's so true because I think a lot of adults really haven't defined that for themselves, and really know what they want. So I guess it's hard to, for with their kids, and I reflect on myself about that too. What do you want to be when you grow up,
Mm,
right? It's the ultimate question.
right. Well, there we go. Yeah. Oh, all the time. I'm fixing to retire, in the next 5 to 10 years or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I still haven't decided what I want to do with life. Might be time to do that.
Right. Well, awesome. So I know we've gone over on time. Just last question here before we close out. Who's been a mentor in your life that you think may be a good guest on the podcast, with a good story to share?
Let me think. I think well, it's interesting because yesterday we were talking with some representatives that are teaching in a superintendent program, and I would say obviously the principal and then who became a superintendent that I worked under, although I don't know if he's even available anymore because he retired about 10, 15 years ago, uh, was Dr. Clay Webb, and he helped me just talking through some things. I do think that what's interesting is that sometimes, and I don't want it to sound elitist, and I realize it might, but I don't mean it that way. But because in school districts, there's only one superintendent, sometimes that collegial being able to talk to other superintendents, um, just for that little bit of understanding. And it's not that someone who's not in that role can't comprehend or feel pressure in a different way, but sometimes the nature of the job really kind of requires, I'd say, an ongoing side by side mentorship, if that makes sense. Almost like a peer that you're like, hey, I'm struggling this. What do you think? And so sometimes it's in those relationships, like I think in our area, um, I've talked to, oh gosh, Dr. Brian Talton, who's over at Cold Spring, is one we've worked together. Used to sort of our area superintendents would talk and just offering ideas to each other. Um, Unfortunately, so many I know have retired, so I'm not sure anymore who's who's really out there in that area. But I've always enjoyed being able to, kind of like you say, it's nice when someone asks you a question because then you have to go back and walk through it yourself. And then, I interestingly enough, some of the Region 6 service people have been really helpful. Their director is Mike Hollins, and he was really interesting and helpful as a former superintendent, trying to help superintendents. Because if nothing else, a lot of times he was really good about, hey, I don't know, I have no clue, but let me put you in contact with so and so because they told me last week they went through this. And so, just as a networking connector, that was really a good thing. So that's just a couple of names, a little out of the
Well,
box, probably.
Well, and besides the names that you shared, I think one thing that our listeners can glean through that response is how many people and mentors and connectors and others that have influenced your career and I think that's a lesson there that you don't really do it all yourself. It's a
Yeah,
takes a community, right?
it really does. When you said that, something really struck me, and I don't want to belabor it, but sometimes it's just sitting down with a colleague that you might not even be tight with, and they may just hit something that you didn't see. I remember, and we're not super tight, but Walter Jackson is the superintendent down in, I think it's, oh my gosh, where is he now? It's not Laporte. Maybe it is Laporte. But anyway, he's down there. But he was in Brenham, and we used to work and talk together a little bit, not very often, and we weren't really close. But I remember I was going through a sort of a challenging work issue that really was gripping me pretty hard, and it was a simple thing, but it was along the lines of sometimes to do the job you have to do the job, and as silly as that sounded, it might be if you sometimes you got to evaluate. It's sort of like the old phrase, is this the hill you want to die on? And sometimes that is the hill you want to die on. But sometimes you got to take a bite, a breath, and go, in the long term, is this issue or is this thing something that I don't want to compromise on, but really could? Not ethically, certainly not legally, but maybe just, hey, I don't think we should do that, but it may cost me more in the long run than winning this little thing. The old expression, you may win your battle, but lose the war. And it was just the way it came across at the time that made me just kind of see the whole issue a lot different and have to admit, I got to let that go. Whether I'm right or wrong might not even matter in that case. And I just think little things like that are so helpful.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you closing out with that response because that I think it helps me and I know it'll help the listeners just kind of reflect on things in their life and their experiences as well. So I think that that reflection can go a long ways in a lot of different areas. So well, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast today.
Yeah, man, I really enjoyed it. I felt like it. Yeah, I honestly hadn't heard of it before, but it was great. It was a real fun experience. I really enjoyed it.
All right, well, we're the top public education podcast for 2025 and beyond.
I like it.
That's our we
That's awesome.
we've reached an order of magnitude and I think if I were to show you the graph, the trend of our podcast,
Mm-hmm.
it's like Mount Everest. It's a pretty steep curve. So I'm excited
No, that's
about
cool.
the great conversations that people such as yourself have brought on the podcast. So
That's awesome, man. Well, congratulations. That's great. Congratulations, and keep up the good work because it's education has to be what it offers the opportunity. And again, whether that's public, private, whatever it is, education is an opportunity to really, find that thing that is you, whatever you are, whatever it is that makes you. It's an opportunity. It's a great vehicle.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much. And for those that have been listening in, we do want to give one final shout out to our sponsor before we close out. Ideal Impact's giving away hundreds of millions of dollars to public education in the form of a free gift. So if your district needs unrestricted funds, reach out to Ideal Impact. And for those that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.